on those results. And then at the end, I just have one quick slide on kind of what's up next with the groundwater plan. So I'll invite Kevin to give the overview of our well sampling.
Kevin, thank you for being so
Yeah, thanks, Lori. Thanks, everybody. I said it before. It's always fun going around the state and seeing how different counties function. And so this was fun for me to see, and I'm glad to be here. Appreciate the time to go over the results from the well testing program and all of the work and funding that Marathon County put towards this and all their staff time as well. Why is this important? I always like to highlight that there is a difference between public water systems and private wells. I grew up in Milwaukee. I live in Stevens Point. Every time I turn on the faucet, I can be reasonably sure that that water quality is safe to drink, whereas private wells, they regulate well construction after it's drilled, after it's in. There's really no requirements for routine testing. If those results indicate a problem, it's up to the individual homeowner to determine what those next steps are. So there's been some additional modifications to well construction, well testing guidelines. As of 2014, all new wells are required to be tested for bacteria and nitrate. And all wells that have well or pump work done are required to be tested for bacteria, nitrate, and arsenic. But there could be years or decades in between when a well is tested. And likely, unless the individual took it upon themselves, it was probably only tested for those 2, maybe 3 things. So project overview, the county, in conjunction with the County Conservation Planning and Zoning, the health department sent recruitment materials to more than 2,000 private well owners. We knew not everybody that was contacted would participate, but we were successful at sampling or receiving samples from 1,001 private wells throughout the county. This was done in 2 phases. 2023, it was Eastern. 2024 was Western Marathon County. Sample kits were mailed to participants. Participants collected their own samples, brought to common drop-off locations where Marathon County staff delivered those to Stevens Point. That lab is state certified to run the elements of interest. Following analysis, all the participants received their results, and there was a series of educational events where one of the goals not only is to collect that data, but provide those individuals that provided a window into the groundwater. We wanted to make sure that they understood what those results meant for them, the safety of their families, as well as the aesthetics of that water. This is giving us an indication of where those samples came from. So it's based on a quarter section or a 40-acre grid cell. So the blue, or the number 1, would mean 1 sample from that unit area. If there's a green, orange, or red dot, that means we receive multiple samples from that same unit area. We display the average concentration in those situations. Generally speaking, pretty good coverage across the county. There are some areas where maybe there's less samples. County forests, the Mead Refuge, those are areas where we just don't have a lot of wells, so we're probably never going to get a lot of samples from those regions. But every well is a window into the groundwater, and we can use that information to help paint a better picture of what we're seeing throughout Marathon County. Just basics, groundwater is not an underground lake or river. It's just the water that occupies the empty space in the soil or the rock below our feet. We heard from some individuals during the public comment how difficult or how little their wells yield, and geology plays a big role in determining how much water a well is capable of providing. It helps us understand where beneath the soil or beneath the land surface we're likely to find adequate water. It determines how quickly groundwater, or in some cases contaminants, are able to move through that aquifer. And water is always moving to low spots, the lakes, rivers, streams, wetlands. Anything we do on the land surface can impact that resource. So things like nitrate and chloride are naturally low, and where they're elevated, it gives us some idea that the land use is impacting that water supply. There's other things like hardness, alkalinity, pH, which are impacted by the rocks or the soils themselves. The list on the left is showing all the different parameters that we tested for. The bold are ones that have health-related drinking water concerns associated with them, so nitrate arsenic, manganese, lead, copper, zinc, sodium, sulfate. Diaminochlorotriazine is a fancy name for a breakdown component of atrazine-type pesticides. There's a lot of things that we test for aesthetic reasons. Things like iron, manganese can stain or cause precipitation. Black or brown or orange precipitates to form and are one of the more common aesthetic complaints that people have. Some of these, again, are useful for understanding land use impacts or other environmental concerns. And then they help us understand geologic relationships, or in some instances, it helps us determine which aquifer people are likely pulling their water from. Just briefly, hardness is the measure of calcium and magnesium. It's naturally occurring. This is the reason why somebody might have a water softener. So this test has some added value in that if people are trying to understand whether to buy a water softener, this gives them some insight. It also helps them determine where that water softener should be set in terms of hardness and regeneration cycles. Here is the map showing the hardness. So the reason I showed this map is just, there's different patterns. If you squint, you can see kind of different spatial patterns, where along the Wisconsin River Valley, you'll see those blue or those low hardness levels. That's low calcium and magnesium. Low mineral content also makes water more corrosive or aggressive, particularly to metal plumbing. So those are areas in particular where people that have copper or maybe copper with lead solder should be encouraged, maybe more encouraged, to test for those particular elements, because of the potential risk of that low mineral content water negatively impacting with the plumbing system. In other parts of the county, the hardness is generally in kind of an ideal or a hard range, but it gives us an indication of where people are most likely going to benefit from a water softener, or in the case of that Wisconsin River Valley, wells that might benefit from PEX plumbing or maybe an acid neutralizer to help buffer that corrosive water. Nitrate is a test that's important to health. So anything greater than 10 is considered unsuitable for infants, women who are or may become pregnant. And there's increasing literature to suggest long-term complications to even adults. So we encourage everyone to avoid long-term consumption of nitrate greater than 10. Less than 1 is natural. So when we get greater than 1, it's giving us indication that land use is having some sort of impact to that water supply. Sources of nitrate would include agricultural fertilizers, lawn fertilizers, septic systems. Even properly functioning septic systems will release nitrate and other things to the water supply or the groundwater. And then animal wastes that are spread, stacked, or stored on the landscape, as well as biosolids. I forgot to include biosolids on there. That would be another potential source of nitrate. When those products break down, one of the reasons we allow them to be applied to fields is that they do contain some nutrient source. So if that nutrient source is released and plant available, it also has the potential to turn into nitrate and leach to groundwater. This is showing us the nitrate map. So the blue are kind of background or natural levels. That's about 45% of all the samples that were submitted fall into that category. That means there's about 55% showing evidence of land use impacts. And there's just over 11% that exceed that drinking water standard. How does that compare to the statewide average? Statewide, we might expect 8 to 10% of all 800,000 private wells might exceed that drinking water standard. So Marathon County is a little bit higher than what we might expect to see statewide. The other thing I'd point out is that it's not distributed equally, right? So there's certain portions of the county where if you drill a well, you're more likely to exceed or have elevated levels of nitrate. So that's one of the things that we've yet to do is kind of create a statistical model that helps paint the picture across Marathon County. Utilizing these data, we'll be able to create kind of a predictive surface that allows those regions or those areas where maybe we didn't get a lot of samples, we'll still be able to make inferences about things like nitrate and chloride for Marathon County, even in those areas, again, where we didn't receive samples, just based on kind of the analysis and the application of a statistical model to Marathon County. This just shows a strong, if we look at the sources, there's no surprise really that those areas where we have more intensive agricultural activity, just due to the sheer amount of nitrogen that a lot of those fields get. It would be great if plants were 100% efficient at storing and scavenging that nitrogen, but they're inherently a little bit leaky. So there's no surprise that those areas where we have more intensive ag land are areas where we generally see higher levels. There's also soils that go into this. So this is the soils map. So this is drainage classification, how easily the water moves through the soil in different locations. The red areas are more leachable or drain better. The green areas are less well drained. So if we just kind of scale back or go back to the nitrate slide, you'll notice far western Marathon County, there's a lot of ag land. Maybe some of the most intensive ag land is over there. But if we look at the nitrate concentrations, they're a little bit less, and that in large part has to do with the soils. So we might have more runoff issues, but in terms of how much nitrate is getting into the groundwater in those areas, groundwater doesn't appear to be as impacted as those areas where we have soils which are draining a little bit better.
I have to ask a question with that last slide. What are the black spots there?
Oh, sorry about that. So those black spots, and I should have put that in the legend, those were the original recruitment wells.
Got it.
So just helping us understand where did we have gaps, why did we have gaps?
Yep.
But in general, I think we had good coverage across a lot of the major drainage classifications. That's where this slide helps us understand kind of the coverage. So these are box plots, and the data for nitrate is broken out by percent ag land, so 0 to 25%, 25 to 50, 50 to 75. As you increase the percentage of ag land within a 500-meter buffer around the well, you see that nitrate concentration go up. If we do that same analysis, only instead of ag land, we look at soil drainage. The larger the number, the more well drained that soil. 2 is kind of poorly drained, 3 moderately poorly drained, 5 is well drained, 6 and 7 are, excessively well drained. These 6 and 7s a lot of times are occurring next to the Wisconsin River Valley, where we don't have as much agricultural activity, so that's why we see that drop. But in general, as the soil becomes more well drained, those are areas we know are more prone to nitrate loss or nitrate leaching. And then if we look at those wells which we have well construction information on, so casing depth, that metal pipe that sticks out of the ground also extends into the ground. If that casing extends into the water table, the further into the water table that pipe extends, generally speaking, the older the water, the longer it takes for that water to reach that well, we see some decline or decrease in nitrate as a function of well depth. There's a lot of wells for which we did not have good construction information, but for those that we did, we do have some maybe guidance or some better recommendations in terms of how wells should be constructed to avoid high levels. Chloride is another indicator of land use impacts. No health effects, but greater than 250 can give water kind of a salty taste. Sources, potash fertilizers, so the potassium we supply to crops is usually potassium chloride. The chloride is highly leachable. Septic systems, human waste contains chloride. If we have a water softener, that's largely discharging that brine to the septic tank. And then road salt, especially in urban areas, is going to be a major source of chloride. And not surprising, if we look at the maps, some of the highest levels of chloride we're finding near major urban areas. But then in the agricultural regions, we don't necessarily see the excessively high concentrations, more than 100 milligrams per liter, but we do see levels elevated above that that 10 milligram per liter cutoff for what we might consider to be natural or background levels. So giving us an indication of where groundwater is susceptible and where land use is impacting the resource that we're relying on for our drinking water. Arsenic is naturally occurring, so even though there's human sources of arsenic, when we find it in groundwater, by and large, this is from naturally occurring mineral deposits. The standard is 0.01 milligrams per liter, so pretty small. This map I need to update. This is arsenic aggregated by town range, I think back in maybe 2014. So with all of the new data that we have for Marathon County, we'd be able to paint a much more complete picture than this map shows. Obviously, some health effects from exposure to that in our drinking water. If we look at the prevalence of arsenic in Marathon County, the blue dots would essentially be safe for drinking water. There's about 2%, not a huge number, about 2% that would exceed that arsenic drinking water standard. So this is a recommended test for all private wells. I think the risk of exceeding that standard is not high, but it's also not zero. So this provides some additional data for the health department and others to maybe target certain regions. We know, Taylor County has a higher percent kind of exceedance than what we might see statewide. So as we approach Western Marathon County, you will notice that there's more dark blue dots. It's kind of hard to see on here. The dark blue or the B would be detectable levels that are safe, but the prevalence of arsenic detects does go up as I think you go west throughout the county, west and north. Manganese is something that a lot of people probably have not heard as much of. This causes kind of black or brown staining. We find it a lot in wells that have iron issues, or people that complain about iron are likely also at risk for manganese. So aesthetically, it causes that fine black precipitate or black staining. And then there is a health advisory level when it gets too high, above 0.3 milligrams per liter. Long-term exposure has been associated with Parkinson-like symptoms in people because of the way in which it interacts with the nervous system. So if we look at manganese concentrations, you'll see that drinking water standard, the aesthetic level is 0.05, so green, orange, red, black would fall into that category. That's just about 20%, or 1 in 5 would have aesthetic concerns related to manganese. And then there's about 6% that actually exceed that health-based standard. So this is something that I think most individuals, most well owners, if they haven't checked for, would benefit from, particularly if they complain about staining from iron. This might be something that they are more at risk for. And then pesticides, I'm not going to cover all the tests that we did, but I wanted to highlight some of the more important ones. Pesticides, there's literally hundreds of different compounds that we could test for. We know, thanks to the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection, the most frequently detected pesticides in Wisconsin's groundwater would be allichlor, metolachlor, atrazine, metribuzin, cyanazine, or breakdown components of what we call those parent compounds. Atrazine is the one that's most likely to exceed a health-based standard, and it's one for which there's a relatively cheap and cost-effective screening tool, which we call DACT, or diaminochlorotriazine. It's specific to a breakdown component of atrazine, but it tends to be one that is more commonly found in groundwater. And when it exceeds a certain threshold, Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection is oftentimes interested in doing more extensive follow-up testing on their dime, or within the confines of some of the funding that they have. So there's that added value of that test. Not only is it the most likely to exceed a health-based standard, but should it be high, there's additional resources that people can access to collect more information about the safety of that water system. The good news is that when we look at DACT, the vast majority were not detecting DACT. Could be that people are switching away from atrazine type compounds. Could be that the soils or the use in this area just mean it's less prevalent. We did find it in about 1% of the samples that were submitted, but hopefully, this maybe provides some peace of mind to a lot of people. If their nitrate level is low, you can be fairly confident that the pesticide levels are going to be low. Those areas where we found DACT did tend to correlate with those areas where we had the highest levels of nitrate. Not surprising, if nitrate and other compounds can move through the soil, those are going to be areas where pesticides have the greatest chance of breaking through as well.
So I have to ask a quick question there. So I don't want to say I live in Western Marathon County, but I definitely live on the western side of the county, right by Marathon City. And I've been around ag all my life, and I've seen, how strong ag is in the western side of the county. And I guess my question would be, with what you're testing for with DACT here, you said that there would be a switchover from previous chemicals that would have been used. I mean, I guess what I'm struggling with is that wouldn't those chemicals that would pop up for DACT still be there to be detected, or do they have like a half-life? I'm not a scientist, so excuse me, but I'm just really surprised by this result.
Yeah, they can, some of them can break down into different compounds. If for instance, we're not seeing a lot of nitrate in the water, it's possible that they are more likely running off. So they're not building up in the soil, but they may be running off.
That makes sense.
Roundup is prominent as Roundup is used on the landscape. It does bind to soil. Mm-hmm. It tends to photodegrade pretty rapidly. So when I get calls about testing for pesticides, everybody wants to test for Roundup, but the chemical composition, the way that particular compound behaves, it's not something that we'd expect to find in groundwater very, very prominently.
Okay.
So if we were to test for pesticides, really allichlor, metolachlor, specifically their breakdown components, would give you the best chance. When we look at DAGCAP research, metolachlor ESA is detected by far the most frequently because it's the most water soluble.
Okay.
So that's the issue with pesticides, is they're expensive. There's many different pesticides depending on where you're at in the state and how likely they are to be used or applied. And if they're not being used, you're not going to find them. So it's always the more chemicals you can look for, the more information you'll get. We may be missing pesticide migration into groundwater, specifically because we were only looking at DACT. I don't know, Kirsty or Lori, do you know how many samples DAGCAP might have followed up on?
Yeah, there was, I think we had maybe 2 total DACT positives from DACCAP testing, but they did not have a huge response rate either for folks that they reached out to. I think, wow, these numbers are totally off the top of my head, so I apologize. I think that it may be about 25 tests. So it's certainly not as voluminous as our 1,000 tests, but yeah, similar to these results, very, very low hits on DACT.
So that could be a positive message, is that, even though these chemicals are being used, not to say that you wouldn't find them in surface water, but in terms of people's wells, maybe limited mobility.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
I'll just briefly, the other thing that we did as a function of this project was we put together a dashboard, which is public facing. So if you wanted to drill or dive into the data in a little bit more detail, you wouldn't be able to get specifics about whose well it is. It's generally kind of at a level that wouldn't give away a specific property, but it does give you some indication of how things like nitrate vary throughout the study area. If you wanted to look at it by municipality, there is the ability to aggregate it. If you clicked on Berlin, you'd see the average, minimum, maximum number of samples, and you could get that information for any of the municipalities. You can switch or toggle between any of the parameters. So if we wanted to look at hardness, generally harder water in the east and the west, and then lower mineral content along the Wisconsin River. Manganese, again, showing you with the different colors where you're more likely to find manganese. It's also giving us, if we wanted to see individual wells and the percent of rural crops, or maybe the percent of all agriculture, these are where we got those aggregated categories from. So you're seeing, based on the color of the well, which wells fall into the different categories for percent ag land, casing depths below the water table. The gray dots are no information, but as much information as we can provide on these maps, we tried to. So here's the soil drainage. Again, they're really well-drained soils, and the wells are along the Wisconsin River. There's some other ways that you can explore that data. So those box plots that I showed, if you go to wells and geology, this kind of generates those plots that you can interact with. If you wanted to look at municipality and see how nitrate varied throughout all of the different municipalities, you can see that for any of the different parameters of interest. So that is another tool that you can access today or anytime in the future. And with that, I will just put my contact information if there's additional questions that people have. After today, I'm more than happy to field those via phone or email.
Yeah, any questions right now from the committee? Well, I knew, what'd you say, Rick? I would echo that. I am very impressed, and this is a tremendous amount of information that, really gives us, I think, a good snapshot of, what the wells look like. I'm kind of speechless, to be honest. I think this is wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
Question, if all the locations of the wells up there, if I give you my location, can you pinpoint that on there?
So if you give me your location, did you participate in the program?
Yep.
You did. We would have assigned a project ID number, and we do. I believe we did try to put that on the information sheet, and I don't know if we communicated that because we didn't have the dashboard ready at that time. But with that project ID, you could look at a drop-down list and pull up your individual information.
Yeah, just by looking at the map, I knew where I was, and it was, and the information that this gave was correct, what I got back, so.
And I just want to say that the county departments really did the bulk of the legwork. We get to do the fun part, but in terms of, organizing, reaching out to folks, bringing the samples in, fielding their questions, that was all on your department staff. So it wouldn't have been possible without them and their involvement. And I know Lori has some just next steps for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to give the committee a quick update on where we go next with this too, because this was part of creating our updated groundwater plan. So right now we're working with the health department to finalize that plan to bring to you all and to bring to the county board for adoption. One of the things we will be doing within that plan is just talking about strategies, and we'll probably talk to our groundwater work group too as we work through some of those strategy ideas. The ideas that we have on this slide right now are ones that we've talked to you all, I think, about off and on over the last year or so, things that we've been considering that we're learning from doing this groundwater planning effort on what might help our county. I think a lot of them actually focus on the idea of more education and outreach, just encouraging people to get that information about their well, and then if they do find out they have a problem, to follow up and find resources to figure out what they can do so that they can have access to clean drinking water. We talk about that hashtag marathon method. That's something we've been doing with these samples as well. Where we've had elevated levels above the recommended standard, we are doing follow-up with landowners around those wells to say, hey, you had a neighbor who tested high for something. Have you had your well tested? This is something you might want to consider. The ARPA funding is back in the state of Wisconsin, so we are connecting again with landowners as much as possible to connect them to funding to help fix any problems they have with their wells. And then we're also talking about just how we could do more ongoing monitoring in the county. That includes trying to incorporate some of the data the health department is getting into our data sets so that we can keep an eye on that and keep monitoring. And also just looking at what other surrounding counties are doing too. A lot of them, for a very low investment every year, are going back out to their communities to sample a small sector of their county each year. So they put it on a cycle and they go out and get more samples every year. We think we have some ideas that we'd like to bring forth in the coming months that on a way to do that wouldn't cost the county a lot of money at all. So, and the other thing we have talked about the community well refill stations as well. So if there isn't any other way for people to get access to clean water, or if they can't get their well mitigated, we have options to, if we wanted to go that route. We're following what Chippewa County is doing as well. We're just keeping an eye on that to see how that develops and see if that's an idea that Marathon County would also like to consider at some point in the future. So I think that's it for the moment.
All right. Anything from the health department?
I like this. This is great.
Okay.
Yeah. Got to keep moving it forward.
Sure.
Like it's been discussed. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your patience. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, thank you to CPC, the health department, and thank you to UWSP for this information. This is excellent. I'm stunned. I thought this was going to be a great benefit for the county, and we had access to it with the EIF funds, and this is great to have this data. It's wonderful. So, okay. Yeah, and thank you for the presentation as well. Okay. We'll move on to 6A2, discussion on Marathon County Land and Water Resource Management Plan, 5-year review document. Lori, you said this is only going to be a couple minutes, so.
And that is my pledge to you as well.
3 minutes or less.
Yes, absolutely.
Go ahead, Christine.
Before I do my minute and a half on this next topic, I also want to say we are also continually speechless when we work with Dr. Masaryk. He is the creme de la creme of groundwater scientists in the state of Wisconsin, and we are so lucky that he is our neighbor in Portage County, and him and his staff have been phenomenal to work with. And I know after seeing his presentation, you guys got just a little taste of what we get when we work with him, but I just want to express my appreciation to him and his crew. We've had a wonderful experience, so thank you. So this topic we have on the agenda because you're all familiar now with Marathon County's Land and Water Resource Management Plan, which every county has one of these. They have to be updated every 10 years. The State Department of Ag also mandates a 5-year check-in with them. So that's what Matt Repking and I are going to go do actually on April 1st is the date. So we will not be able to join you for the next ERC meeting because that's the date they scheduled us for. So it's before the State Land and Water Board, which is a group of some elected officials. Some of them are Land Conservation Committee members like yourself, but then there are actual elections for people on the board. So we are not worried about this check-in at all because all the parameters that we've said we needed to be meeting in our goal setting, we have not only met, but we've exceeded most of them. And I got a call this afternoon from the director for DATCAP's Land and Water Bureau, and she said, just wanted to let you know, Kirsty, Marathon County is way ahead of the game compared to the other counties that we meet with. She said the documents that she received from us were phenomenal. They're excited to talk with us. So I'm just saying that out loud so that you all know there's nothing that any of us need to worry about. It'll be a great check-in. We're excited to talk with them. The documents are here for you to review. That's all that needs to be done.
Okay, any questions? All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, 7, we got nothing. 8, next meeting, April 1st, 2025, 3 p.m., Assembly Room, future agenda items. A, committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. B, announcements, requests, correspondence. Lori, you had something.
Just one announcement, Conservation Planning and Zoning has finished moving from 210 River Drive. We are now located at 1100 Lakeview on the North Central Healthcare Campus, or the Lakeview campus, as we like to call it. If you're coming to visit CPZ, you go to door 23. If you're coming down there for a committee meeting, which some of you might be doing that as well, you're typically going to door 31. So that's where the conference rooms are. But CPZ staff, if you want to find us, you'll want to come to door 23, and there's signage that'll take you back to our suite. So 210 is more or less empty now. So,
Well, thanks, Lori. Appreciate it. All right, anything else? Announcements, requests, correspondence? Okay. I got two real quick things. One, these mics suck. And two, this was a long meeting. At times it was even a little bit contentious, and I just want to thank the committee members for sticking it out today. Appreciate you all being so respectful of everybody, regardless of their side, on these issues. And it's a good group that we have right now. And I want to thank staff for your professionalism throughout this process. And yeah, I just want to express my appreciation of everything. So with that being said, we are on to number 9. Motion by Seefeld, second by Drabeck. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thanks, everybody, and safe travels this evening.